So if the Best Casting Oscar had always been around, what do I think would have been the top 10 wins? Hey guys, it's Brian. Welcome to the Awards Contender. I don't know about you. I am very, very excited about the Best Casting Oscar, which is starting in a few months. The films of 2025 are eligible for this new Academy Awards category, Best Casting. That is a very important job. I worked in casting for 2 years when I was younger, and to find the right people for every speaking role in a movie, it's tricky. It's not easy, it's not the director just saying, oh, I want him and her and him and her, and you make a few calls and voila, there's our cast. Casting doesn't work that way. It often takes many, many months and multiple people working together to get that perfect cast in the movie. So I am thrilled Best Casting is coming to the 98th Oscars. Now, looking back at almost 100 years of Academy Awards history, what do I think would have won Best Casting, and what would have been some of the truly all-timer victories in that category? We'll never know for sure, of course, but let's have some fun with this. Talk about what I think probably would have taken Best Casting and would have been some really great wins. Let's begin with number 10, The Silence of the Lambs. So something I really hope is the case with Best Casting is that every year the award doesn't just go to the biggest ensemble, Oh, your film has 35 major roles versus this film, which has only 7. The one with 35 automatically wins Best Casting. I hope that's not the case, because as you'll see in this video, a few of my choices, it's only a few select actors. It's not like, a cast of 20 plus. Like The Silence of the Lambs, there's a lot of people in that movie. It's not a two-hander, it's not just 2 people. But when we think about the casting in The Silence of the Lambs, we always go to Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter and Jodie Foster as Clarice Starling. They both won the Oscars that year in their respective acting categories. The movie won Picture, Director, Adapted Screenplay. Yeah, I think The Silence of the Lambs would have also won Best Casting, and it would have been a great victory, right? Like, there were so many people in Hollywood in 1990, who could have played those 2 main roles. I think I heard once that Sean Connery was approached to play Hannibal Lecter. I know Michelle Pfeiffer was in the mix to play Clarice Starling. But boy, we got the 2 perfect actors for that movie. I can't imagine anyone but Hopkins and Foster in that. We got Hannibal a decade later, and as great of an actress as Julianne Moore is, it was just, that was a hard movie to get through, seeing someone else play Clarice that wasn't Jodie Foster. The casting in The Silence of the Lambs was absolutely impeccable. Number 9, Gone with the Wind. So thinking back on those early years of the Oscars, if Best Casting had been there right from the beginning, first off, that would have been unlikely because the first decade of the Academy Awards, they were changing categories left and right. Every year, they were adding stuff, taking stuff away. I'm kind of surprised there wasn't a random year in the 30s, like 1936, where they introduced Best Casting, and then the next year they dropped it or something. The way casting worked in those early years in Hollywood, it was different than it is now. Oftentimes, an actor would sign a 7-year contract, and producers, higher up executives, they would just throw actors in whatever movie that was needed of them. There wasn't an art to casting very much in the 30s and 40s. The way it definitely evolved, I would say, into the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and today. But even back then, in the golden age of Hollywood, casting was still important, and so I don't know exactly how everyone came to be in 1939's Gone with the Wind, but that absolutely would have won Best Casting, and it would have been deserved. Every single person cast in that 4-hour epic is the right person. I mean, so many people nominated, winning Oscars for their performances in that movie. You had Olivia de Havilland. You had Hattie McDaniel, of course, the first black person to win an acting Oscar. There's Clark Gable as Rhett Butler. I mean, talk about perfect casting. And then for the lead role, there was a very much publicized, famous search for the perfect actress to play Scarlett O'Hara. I mean, everybody who knew anybody in Hollywood wanted that role, and they landed on Vivien Leigh. I mean, I can't imagine that role without Vivien Leigh. She was the right person at the right time for that character, and she just hits it out of the park. I mean, again, best casting would have been unlikely in the 30s and 40s, I think, at the Oscars. It just wouldn't have happened. But this entire video is a what if scenario. So if, going all the way back to the beginning, they had best casting, I do think one of the best wins throughout the decades in this category would have been Gone with the Wind. Number 8, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Okay, now we have a smaller cast to talk about. 4 people, really, for that entire movie. Outside of just a few bit parts here and there. It's mostly those 4 characters, those 4 actors, and talk about perfectly cast, right? And it could have gone south. I mean, the idea of Elizabeth Taylor in her mid-30s, playing the role of Martha, it could have been distracting, especially pairing her with her real lover, in real life, Richard Burton, who plays George. They were in a bunch of films together in the 60s and 70s, and some of them aren't very good, but there was something to that pairing in that film directed by Mike Nichols, black and white cinematography. Elizabeth Taylor did not mess around. She showed up to give the performance of her career, and Richard Burton is right there with her. And then in the other 2 roles, you have George Segal and Sandy Dennis at the Oscars. All 4 were nominated, but only the women won. Taylor took Best Actress, and Dennis took Best Supporting Actress. So even though Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf didn't win the Oscars that year for Best Picture and Best Director, those went to A Man for All Seasons. I feel like if a movie has only 4 major characters and all 4 actors get nominated at the Oscars, it's probably winning Best Casting. And again, I don't want casting to only go to giant ensembles. I think in a film with only 4 principal characters, if all 4 actors are cast really well, and you get to the end of that narrative and you can't imagine anyone else in those 4 roles, I think that deserves to win Best Casting. Obviously, they did their job, and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf lives or dies by those performances. And boy, did lightning strike on that production when it came to the cast. Number 7, Doubt. Now here's another film, a much more recent film, which didn't win Best Picture, Best Director. Was it even nominated for Picture and Director, Doubt? I don't think it was. That was the year Slumdog Millionaire won Best Director and Best Picture, and did very well. Would Slumdog Millionaire have won Best Casting? It probably would have been nominated, but I don't think it would have won, especially over Doubt, which, like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, has mostly 4 principal characters who are all just divinely cast in that movie. I mean, there had been stage productions, obviously with different actors and things. I know Cherry Jones played the Meryl Streep role on stage, on Broadway. And I think at the first meeting between Meryl Streep and the writer-director John Patrick Shanley, Streep was like, why don't you just use Cherry Jones? She kind of originated this role on stage. But Shanley wanted to go a different direction for his movie. This was his baby. He was directing for the first time as a film, which is very different from the stage. And so he decided to go with Streep and Amy Adams and Philip Seymour Hoffman and Viola Davis. Wow. If any one of those characters had been played by the wrong performer, someone who's talented, but just didn't fit the character right, that movie could have crashed and burned. it was essential to get the right actors for those roles to make that movie soar. And I watched Doubt every few years and just taking in those astonishing performances every time. In a way, it's like the best any of those actors have ever been. I mean, obviously Hoffman has really done amazing work in other movies. Streep, of course, Sophie's Choice. But in 2008, I'm very happy all four of those actors were available and, gave everything they had to the film adaptation of Doubt. What a remarkable job casting director Ellen Chenoweth did with Doubt. I mean, everybody, not just the four people, right? The kids, the nuns, everybody in Doubt. It was just so well cast all the way through. Again, because the film wasn't in picture and director at the Oscars, you might argue with me like, well, would it have won casting, if it wasn't in picture? But I still do think Doubt would have won casting that year, especially because all four of those performances were nominated, even though they didn't win. I think the Academy recognizing all four, at least with nominations, tells me that Doubt probably would have won Best Casting. Number 6, The Color Purple. So when it comes to Academy Awards history, one of the most famous examples of a movie crashing and burning on Oscars night was The Color Purple in early 1986. That film got 11 Oscar nominations. I mean, it got 11 without Best Director for Steven Spielberg. If Spielberg had made it into director, it would have had 12, and that movie went completely empty-handed that night. It could not win a single thing, and still to this day, it ties the record for a movie with the most nominations to win nothing, with 1977's The Turning Point, 11 nominations, 0 wins. I think if Best Casting had been a category in 86, The Color Purple would have won something. I do. I think it would have taken casting over Out of Africa, which won Best Picture and Best Director that year. Out of Africa wouldn't have won Best Casting. I think about that ensemble in The Color Purple. It's so precisely cast. It's done so well. The child performers who grow up into the adult performers, that's handled really well. And then Danny Glover was inspired casting for his role. Whoopi Goldberg, I mean, she was known for comedy. She was a stand-up comic at the time. How many people would have looked at her stage show and said she should play an extremely dramatic role, in a period film? So that was also inspired and really great that Whoopi Goldberg got that chance to shine, and that really jump-started her film career at the time. I think about that dinner scene at the end where around a large table you have most of the major talent in that movie, and everybody is doing phenomenal work. Even though none of the 3 actors nominated for their performances in The Color Purple at the Oscars could win. Even though they couldn't win, Whoopi Goldberg came very close. That was the year of Geraldine Page winning her Best Actress Oscar, on her 8th try. Her 8th nomination, right before she died. She died a year later. She finally won her Academy Award. So Goldberg she just couldn't quite get there. But when I think about Best Casting in the 80s, movies that didn't necessarily win Picture, Director, that could have taken this category, The Color Purple came to mind immediately, and I do think if that category existed back then, The Color Purple would not have gone home empty-handed. Number 5, Moonlight. Now here's the most recent film on this list. I was trying to pick and choose from different eras, different decades. I didn't want to just load this up with a bunch of 2010s films, I wanted to go to different eras. But I thought about in the last 15 years, what's a movie that obviously would have taken Best Casting and would have been an all-timer win, right? I was thinking about it, a lot of titles came to mind, but Moonlight would be right there at the top. I mean, talk about the importance of good casting in that movie. Not just the adult characters, like Mahershala Ali, of course, won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. You had Naomi Harris, who's very memorable in that. But the pivotal casting of those three actors as the same character in three different time periods, as a boy, as a teenager, and as a man, they didn't have to look totally alike, right? I'm happy that it wasn't about just like who looks exactly the same, from time period to time period. It was about the essence of the character, right? Capturing the spirit of that person. It's totally believable at the end that you've been watching the same character all the way through. And I knew that first night watching Moonlight, I knew I had seen a really special example of casting in a movie. If one of those three actors had been played by someone else, it all might have crumbled. It might not have been as special of a movie as it turned out to be. So I do think, obviously, there's a lot of great stuff in Moonlight. The screenwriting, the direction, the performances by everybody. But casting for that film was absolutely crucial, and I do think with Moonlight ultimately winning the Oscars for Best Picture, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Supporting Actor, Casting Director Jesse Ramirez would have won Best Casting as well. Number 4, Goodfellas. What a frickin' amazing cast there is in Goodfellas. I know I've talked about some smaller ensembles like in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and Doubt and things. But, let's be honest, many years I do think best casting will go to large ensembles that are really impressive, just filled to the brim with amazing talents. I mean, you look at Goodfellas, everyone from Ray Liotta to Robert De Niro to Joe Pesci, to much smaller roles, like by Samuel L. Jackson, Like everybody in that film, whether it's a major character, whether it's a side character for like one or two scenes, it's all impeccably cast. Lorraine Bracco is incredible in that movie, got a Best Supporting Actress Oscar nomination. Joe Pesci, of course, won. Ray Liotta should have been nominated for Best Actor. I've talked about that before. It does feel kind of weird to me that the late, great Ray Liotta never got an Oscar nomination. It should have been for Goodfellas. And so, yeah, for this top 10 list, I wanted to pick a Martin Scorsese film. I mean, the casts in his movies are always extraordinary. Like I could go with Casino, I could go with Taxi Driver and Raging Bull and so many great movies. Like, what's one he made that obviously would have won Best Casting? For 1990, the Oscar winner for picture and director is Dances with Wolves, Kevin Costner. I don't think that would have won Best Casting over Goodfellas. That would have been very odd. I've always thought that Goodfellas was kind of in second place that year in a variety of categories, especially picture and director. I do think Goodfellas was second. And because of that very, very strong ensemble cast, there is not one false move there. In the casting, I do think the amazing work by legendary casting director Ellen Lewis would have been given a Best Casting Oscar trophy for Goodfellas. Number 3, Network. What an all-timer film this is. And what an all-timer casting job was done with 1976's Network. I mean, you have some of the best actors of that era working in the industry all in this movie. You had William Holden, you had Peter Finch, Faye Dunaway, Ned Beatty, Beatrice Straight. The list goes on. And it's like, no matter how big or small the role in Network, those actors always get a chance to shine. I mean, Beatrice Straight won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for basically one scene. And she is extraordinary in that scene. It's such a cool win. And I feel like even though Network didn't win Best Picture and Best Director that year, those two trophies went to Rocky for 1976, which, I have certain thoughts about. I think Network is a better film in pretty much every way. Like the performances in that movie matched with that beautiful, exhilarating writing by Paddy Chayefsky, mixed with, the great direction from Sidney Lumet. Like all of the players involved with Network were at the right place at the right time. And especially with those like 3 central roles, like if that had been cast wrong, if it wasn't Finch, if it wasn't Dunaway, I don't think Network is the masterpiece it is. There's so much great stuff happening in that movie, but casting was so crucial and they got it right. I mean, legendary casting director Julia Taylor, who just won an honorary Oscar a few months ago, I think, for her career in film as a casting director. Like, she should have won a competitive prize in casting somewhere along the way. It makes me sad that casting hasn't been around for many decades, because Julia Taylor, who often worked with Woody Allen, like, she probably would have won like 5 or 6 trophies by now, if we're going to be honest. What's a film she absolutely would have won for, I think? 100% Network. Number 2, Pulp Fiction. So this one's a little tricky, right? Pulp Fiction won the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay. And, it got nominated all over the place. It got 3 acting Oscar nominations. But that was the year of Forrest Gump, which won Best Actor for Tom Hanks. It won Best Director, it won Best Picture. It was like the most beloved movie of that year. And it's got a really good cast. So, it's possible Forrest Gump might have just won Best Casting too. But I think at the end of the day, Best Casting for 1994 at the Oscars would have gone to Pulp Fiction, right? It had to go to Pulp Fiction. It's one of the most remarkable ensemble casts ever collected for an individual movie. Everybody is so perfectly cast in that. And it's a who's who of great actors, character actors, bigger name talents, people who've been in movies for decades, people who have just kind of gotten started in the industry. And it's like the creativity of the casting, right? Like John Travolta was at a very low ebb in his career in 93, 94. Like for Quentin Tarantino and his 2 casting directors, Ronnie Yeskel and Gary M. Zuckerbrod, like to think of putting him in the lead role of Vincent Vega, like right after Travolta made Look Who's Talking Now, like the 3rd film in the Look Who's Talking trilogy, that they thought of Travolta, like bringing him back with this star role, and he just nails it, gets a Best Actor Oscar nomination. That's really cool. Samuel L. Jackson, had been acting for many years, had done a lot of small parts in certain things, and was starting to come on strong by like 93, I would say. But this was truly his breakthrough role. Like, I can't imagine anyone but Jackson in that role of Jules. Uma Thurman, perfect. Ving Rhames, perfect. Harvey Keitel, it's like one great actor after another. And then Bruce Willis, he wasn't really known for his dramatic chops around 93. He was like the big action guy. And he takes this really interesting role that's, like the middle part of that movie. Bruce Willis didn't need to do that. But he was the right choice for that character. And so there he is, giving one of his best performances in the movies. Again, I know Pulp Fiction wasn't like the favorite at the Oscars for 94. It only won original screenplay. It didn't take anything else. I still think in a tight race with Forrest Gump, I still think Pulp Fiction would have won the Best Casting Oscar, and it would have been one of the most deserved victories in that category. And finally, that takes me to my number 1 choice. If the Best Casting Academy Award had been around since the beginning, what would have been the best win? This was a very easy choice to make. Number 1, of course, is The Godfather. So in a recent Oscar Top 10 video, I picked The Godfather as the best movie ever made to win the Best Picture Academy Award. That was my choice for number 1. You know, we've had Gone with the Wind, we've had Casablanca, we've had some truly incredible movies win Best Picture. I still think The Godfather 1972 is the best one. So, especially with that remarkable ensemble cast, how could I not pick The Godfather for number one in this video? I mean, that film lives or dies by the casting, you know? As great as the screenplay is, the direction by Francis Ford Coppola, and the cinematography and the editing and, you know, everything that's so bonkers great in The Godfather, it's the casting that was crucial. You know, like the studio wanted more of a star to play Michael Corleone. They didn't want Al Pacino. Like, what if that role had been played by anyone but Pacino? I don't think the movie is as good. I also don't think the studio wanted Marlon Brando to play Vito Corleone. You know, he was kind of washed up by the early 70s. I'm sure the studio would have wanted anyone else, but Coppola, man, he was like, I want Brando. I want this new actor Pacino, and he got what he wanted, and ultimately, it was just perfect. Everybody in The Godfather, many of whom got Oscar nominations, like James Caan, you know, like who got into supporting actor, Robert Duvall, who also got into supporting actor, along with Pacino, who should have been in lead actor, but, you know, that's a story for another day. Of course, Marlon Brando won the Oscar for Best Actor, and even the people in that movie who weren't Oscar nominated, they're all so good. Talia Shire, Diane Keaton, John Cazale, you know, it's just a who's who of really fantastic talent, perfectly matched with every character. The Godfather had 3 casting directors, Louis DiGiamo, Andrea Eastman, and Fred Roos. Fred Roos was a very famous casting director in the 70s. You know, he cast a lot of really important films that decade, but even if you don't know those 3 names, their stamp on one of the best films ever made in the history of motion pictures will always be felt. Every time someone puts on The Godfather, they are seeing the important work done by these 3 extremely talented casting directors. The Godfather, you know, it's just one of the all-time greats. That casting had to be perfect. And boy, did they get it right that time. Sometimes casting doesn't go well. Sometimes poor casting completely destroys what would have been a really great film or a TV show. The casting director's job is so vitally important. And I am thrilled. Best Casting is finally, after almost 100 years of the Academy Awards, a represented category at the telecast. I can't wait to see who wins the very first Oscar for Best Casting, but if it had been around going back many decades, I do think the best victory of all time would have been The Godfather. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and let me know in the comments below what are some other films you think would have made great Oscar wins in Best Casting, and are you excited? Are you as excited as I am for Best Casting to finally be a part of this amazing show? I'll see you next time at the Awards Contender.